There was no crazy 0 day. There was no, they had super ninjas coming from black helicopters dropping into the SolarWinds building to make this thing happen.
What is that? Are they back?
What I think is awesome to talk about the SolarWinds breach are you get to peek behind how a state-sponsored actor work. And so before I talk about that, what I'd like to say is that for your ethical hackers that are out there, if you're new into ethical hacking, don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't.
So your next question, when do I move from being a script kiddie to being a hacker?
My cynical answer to that, David, is
I want to ask you this question. When I've created videos and I've shown people stuff like with PowerShell, they tell me that's stupid because I would just disable that. So what's the in your experience, because you've worked with so many organizations, here's best practice, and like what you've just said, what do companies actually do?
Because, oh man. You know, I used to think I was going to be Pentester for life, right? You know, Pentester for life. You know, and you know, it's easy to think like that. And I could go back there, and I definitely had a fun time doing it. But at the same time, when you realize, and this is what I tell people, I'm like, if you go into most Fortune 100 companies and you look at their security operations teams, their security teams under the CISO, there are a fraction, less than 1%, less than 0.5% of people on that security team that are doing offensive hacking. And that's not because it sucks. That's not because it's in high demand. That's not because there's not enough talent. That's not because of anything else other than in a cybersecurity strategy, the ability to do penetration testing is such a small fraction that influences the overall cybersecurity strategy of the biggest companies in the entire world.
So Neal, you need to tell me now, because you know you've been involved in a lot of corporates and a lot of government organizations. What is your take on the SolarWinds story?
I have a lot of takes on the SolarWinds story. One of the first things that I want to kind of like level set, right, is from my days in the government and my days of doing that role for the United States of America and the NSA. This is not the first time. This is just the first time we caught them, right? That old adage, this is very much the case here is this. This is just happens to be the first time that we caught the Russians. And I'll say this, and you have to read deep to find this. The only reason they were caught is because they took an operational risk that they knew was an operational risk, and it got noisy and they got picked up on their defensive mechanisms. And so that shows that was part of a strategic plan. They were operating on a regular basis from a offensive cyber operations campaign, and it was because they made a mistake that ultimately got them caught. And so I think it's a testament and a realization of the state of cyber war that we're in. And I want to get on a small soapbox on this, because this is something I recently spoke with a CEO of a Fortune 100 company the other week, and one of the statements that I mentioned to him when we were talking about the SolarWinds thing, you know, when I got out of the military in 2013, you know, I'd spent 10 years of my life dealing with APT, dealing with state-sponsored activity and things like that. When I got out, you know, it was hard to make that distinction between, you know, were APTs the threat or were cyber criminals the threat based on the industry and the vertical that I was in. And it was very siloed in that regard. I can remember an APT attack happening and us being like...
I'm going to stop you right now. Just for the international audience, what are the acronyms that you're using?
Sorry, APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. So typically APT is referred to, we use APT as a short acronym for state-sponsored activity. Or really sophisticated actors. Now, in most cases, that doesn't necessarily mean they're sophisticated. It's just an acronym that's been used for a number of years in our industry to kind of not, denominate sophisticated hack attacks.
So apologies for interrupting you. So carry on.
Okay. That's I get carried away with
No,
this,
no, go for it. I'm enjoying it.
And so I think as we've seen the industry grow and the offensive and the defensive side, the cyber criminals, as ransomware has become a huge part of 2020 because of everybody being forced at home. And we can go on a completely different segment on that as well. I think what we've seen is the lines that exist between cyber war, state-sponsored cyber warfare, like what we just recently saw with SolarWinds, and common commodity malware attacks. That line between those two is really, really, really starting to fade away. And we're really starting to see the blurring images of this. And here's the example that I give. When did you think, or when at SolarWinds, did they have a conversation at the CISO, at the CIO, or the board level where they sat down and said, you know what? We have a lot of DoD people who are our customers. We have a lot of, companies like Microsoft that are our customers. We have a lot of companies like FireEye that are our customers. You know what? Maybe we should start thinking about our cybersecurity team the same way that the NSA thinks about protecting, its infrastructure, or the same way that the DoD thinks about protecting its infrastructure. Maybe we should start thinking like military commanders, and we should start thinking about strategy to task, and we should start thinking about, preparing for cyber war. That was never a conversation that happened at the SolarWinds executive team level. And I think when you look at it like that, if you're a company that supplies anything to any company, you need to ask yourself, do you need to start thinking like a military commander, because you might be in the throes of cyber war and you just don't even know it yet.
Yeah, I mean, what I heard in the press is that they actually cut back, and that caused more problems. They didn't invest in beefing up security. Some of the decisions, whatever, I mean, as mentioned in the press, might have actually made it worse.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of security failings, right? I've seen GitHub repos with like SolarWinds 123 on it, or things like that. An FTP server, I think, was found in 2019 that had a guessable password. I think all of those fall back into what we would have whether we were having a PCI, payment card industry conversation, or HIPAA, which is I shouldn't have mentioned HIPAA because I can't tell you what that acronym is. Basically, the healthcare, the healthcare, regulations. All of that is like security 101, and those are things that we always talk about. But I think that that's vastly different than having a conversation at the executive level that says we might have to go to war with Russia. We might have to defend our company from Russia versus the people who wrote, TrickBot, or any of the other, malware or ransomware kits that are out there.
From what I read between the lines about the SolarWinds hack, is it's actually going to help people who are looking for jobs in this industry, because it's kind of put a big spotlight on it, hasn't it? So do you foresee that in the next few years there's going to be a lot more roles for this? I mean, we're discussing like military type, ideas or ways of doing things. What do you think what's going to be the effect of this?
I don't think that this singular incident is going to have a drastic increase in driving people to cybersecurity. And I say that not to say that this is a low key incident or anything like that. I think if you take a look at the last 12 months as a whole, if you look at the pandemic, you see IT organizations that have had to massively force a remote workforce into their organizations. Their VPN concentrators couldn't hold the load. They didn't know how to secure remote workstations. They didn't know how to secure third-party vendors that were coming into organizations to do remote work. I've heard horror stories of laptops that have gone home from companies, and that's the only computer in that household. And so you can imagine that the husband is using that computer, the kids are using that computer, right, for all sorts of stuff. And so that puts a huge amount of risk on a cybersecurity organization that never existed ever before. And so I think over the last 12 months, and then that's not even to take in the fact that as part of the pandemic, ransomware, I'm waiting for the FBI report to release their annual report, but I would venture to say that 2020 was exponentially more profitable for ransomware makers than any other year prior, simply because, and I'm saying exponentially more profitable because of the pandemic and because of everybody working from home. I think that has put an emphasis on the need for cybersecurity. I think what's happened at CISA, one of the weird things that's happened, good here in the States, is we've oftentimes criticized the FBI or the NSA because they know about cyber attacks and they know about adversaries and they know about exploits, but they don't share them with the private companies. And so I think mid-year we started to see a lot of. I think this happened around the F5 zero day that happened, and then it happened with some of the Win login stuff that happened with the Microsoft vulnerability, where we actually saw NSA come out on their Twitter account and be like, "You need to patch this right now. Like this is a problem right now," sort of thing. And then we see CISA, take a more active role in putting out bulletins about vulnerabilities and zero days and things like that out there. I think that shows a shift where there's a lot of focus on cybersecurity that started about mid-year last year. I think FireEye and SolarWinds obviously continue to blow it up, but I think that it's really just riding the wave of why we need more people in cybersecurity. There's an interesting stat I throw around when people ask me about it. There's 3.5 million unfilled open cybersecurity positions globally in the industry right now, and there's not enough people to fill those 3.5 million open headcount right now. And so I think that's just going to continue to exacerbate as we roll into 2021.
So if you've got any thoughts about how I was going to talk just about SolarWinds, but I think I don't know, is there any details you want to talk about SolarWinds, or does it just get boring? And should we just
it just gets boring. I mean, when people talk about SolarWinds, I mean, there's things that we can talk about in terms of like some of the sophistication that happened, some of the unique things that happened about it, some of the things that we've uncovered about the operational security. But talking about SolarWinds as a breach, and I'll say this as if just in case you wanted to use this content,
that'd be great,
right?
yeah.
Talking about SolarWinds as a breach is just like talking about any other company as a breach. What we have to look at is, was there failing on basic security controls? 100%. But that is no different, literally, than almost every other security breach that we've talked about for the last 5 to 10 years. There was no crazy zero day. There was no, they had super ninjas coming from black helicopters dropping into the SolarWinds building to make this thing happen. What I think is awesome to talk about the SolarWinds breach are you get to peek behind how a state-sponsored actor work. And so before I talk about that, what I'd like to say is that for your ethical hackers that are out there, if you're new into ethical hacking, don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't conduct a penetration test the same way that state-sponsored actors do. They'll tell you it takes too much time, you won't have enough time and scope to do it. And what I'm telling you is that that's a fallacy, because people are thinking that to be APT, or advanced persistent threat, it takes you a year to do a penetration test. And those two things are completely uncorrelated together. What makes a penetration test awesome is your ability to think outside the box. And that's exactly what it's like to look behind some of these write-ups on how, especially the one that just came out from CrowdStrike, about how they had malware sitting on developers' computers that did nothing except wait for a specific code compile process on these developers' computers, and then inject its malicious process into that code compile process before it got to the code repository. Now, that's a level of stealth, that's a level of operational security where, I talk very frequently to folks when they ask me for advice to think about what are your requirements and make sure you're designing something that fits form and function. You don't need a big, loud, noisy command and control bot on every computer you hack as part of a penetration test. Maybe you only need one component. Maybe you only need to steal passwords out of memory. Maybe you only need to inject into one DLL to get their camera because it's a camera in a conference room or something like that. That's very much what you get to see inside the SolarWinds hack. Is these guys put malware onto a computer that did one job, and that's what allowed them to stay persistent, stealthy, and exist in that environment for as long as they did.
That's great. I mean, I want to, while you're talking about that, I want to kind of ask you some questions that will help people. Do you think to be a good ethical hacker, you need to learn to code? And which language would you recommend, if any?
The short answer is, do I recommend you learning to code? Yes. Is it an operational requirement? No. And then I'll preface that by saying, if you're an ethical hacker, that does not make you a coder. And if you're a coder, that doesn't make you an ethical hacker. The two things are ridiculously mutually exclusive. I can code, but I'm not a programmer. I couldn't program myself out of a wet paper bag. My code has no comments. It's all run together. excuse me, the indentation is bad. I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible practices from a programming perspective. I think knowing programming is important in ethical hacking. If you're looking on the hierarchy of things you need to learn over your ethical hacking career, I think you're going to be hard pressed to go your entire ethical hacking career without learning some level of scripting or programming. But you don't have to know the inner bowels of C++ or Pascal or or Python or anything like that to be a beginner level hacker whatsoever. Um, I tell people, if you're looking for three, and you'll see this as a trend with me, David. I always talk about the top three, right?
I
Because
like it. It's easy. It's easy to understand. Go on.
yeah. I say if you're looking for the three things to put on your vision board or your wish list or the learning curve that you've got to do to be good in IT or good in ethical hacking, Bash scripting, Python, PowerShell.
I like that.
Those three
I
things.
like that.
I think those three things, if you have a foundation there, everything else is easy off of that.
It's basically you're talking about shell scripting and Python
Yeah.
as the way to get in. Is that right? Or
Exactly. Linux shell scripting, Windows shell scripting, and Python to Python for APIs, Python to bridge the gaps. You can install Python libraries onto Windows. But if you look at some of the ethical hacking toolkits that are out there, like PowerSploit, Mimikatz, some of the Empire command and control post exploitation kits that are out there, those are all very PowerShell, WMIC, kind of coded and focused. PowerShell is still incredibly valuable. Most organizations either don't have PowerShell v3 or don't have PowerShell logging turned on. And in most organizations that I've been a part of, the execution policies in the Active Directory environments are set to allow PowerShell code to run from anybody anywhere. And so PowerShell can be incredibly useful. Most IT teams aren't going to turn it off because they need it for their SCCM pushes or whatever the case is inside their IT organizations. So PowerShell from that aspect, shell scripting because you're probably using Kali Linux or some Debian version that you've mangled together to do ethical hacking. And so you're going to do for loops, you're going to do if-then statements, you're going to do all sorts of stuff real easy, command, greps and things like that from a command line on Linux, and then Python to focus on APIs, focus on interoperability between lots of different operating systems, focus on threading, because if you're doing millions or thousands of queries on something, you're going to want to thread it out. So I think it's shell scripting, Python, and then everything else on top of that.
I mean, that's great. I mean, so I want to ask you this question. When I've created videos and I've shown people stuff like with PowerShell, they tell me that's stupid because I would just disable that. So what's the in your experience, because you've worked with so many organizations, here's best practice, and like what you've just said, what do companies actually do? Because
oh man, I can count on one hand, I think, the amount of companies that I've actually looked at that have PowerShell logging enabled and going into their SIM, and have by default execution policies turned off. And of the companies that do have execution policies turned off on workstations, most users still have the ability to change that execution policy. They just don't realize it because it's not something a normal user would do. And so I've literally popped onto a box, used the user shell that I had access to, changed the execution policy on that box to allow me to execute, user generated PowerShell code, pulled my PowerShell code over into that user shell, elevated my privileges with that PowerShell code, and gotten a shell back, an elevated shell back, just by simply running, PowerShell code on a box. So yeah, best practices: PowerShell v3, PowerShell logging on, execution mode turned off, push everything out through pre-written MSIs via SCCM. Yeah, that's all best practices. Not what happens in the majority of the organizations.
I'm glad you said that, because I think it sounds like a lot of the problems is people don't do best practice for whatever reason. They don't think it's necessary, it's too much hassle, whatever. So your next question: when do I move from being a script kiddie to being a hacker?
My my cynical answer to that, David, is when you stop posting that you DDoS people by getting their IP address on Reddit, when you stop posting that you've downloaded somebody else's code and ran it one time on a test machine and therefore you're elite SOAR hacksaw, when you stop thinking that just because you have Kali Linux inside of a VM that you're a hacker, when you change that mindset, in my mind, you're no longer a script kiddie. If we can break people out of that mindset of trying to put their egos, the fact that the ignorance of less smart people to understand what Kali Linux is or the value of an IP address, when we stop trying to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to tell people how awesome you are in this space, I think that's when you mentally graduate out of the script kiddie phase.
I mean, we spoke about some of this offline, but let's talk about this now. There seems to be this. I've had on my YouTube videos, I get the best comments ever on my hacking videos or my like ethical hacking videos. That you are I won't even mention the words beep 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 beep. Whatever. There seems to be this for whatever reason this issue in the ethical hacking space, if you like, of my ego is better than yours, or I'm better than yours. So, what would you say to that?
I think that I've written about this. I've written articles for folks about this. I actually had a pretty divisive rift in my community, having written about the toxicity inside of cybersecurity, inside of InfoSec. And if you've been part of some of the bigger followings and groups on Twitter, it's real easy to get caught up in some of the just real toxicity that happens inside the cybersecurity community. And I think a lot of that toxicity is very much centered around people's egos. And I'm not a psychology. I don't play one on TV, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night. But what I will say is I think a couple of things have contributed to that. We have people who are chest thumpers who are like, I hack Stratfor, I'm part of Anonymous, I bring down global governments. They're like, hoo, I hacked into Hacking Team. They hold those things up as badges of honor. And what that's done is that's created a mentality that says that, if you're not this good, if you're not this high to ride this ride, you don't belong in this industry. And I think that same mentality can be taken over to some of the mantras that we've built, or some of the ways that we've interpreted the try harder mentality that has come out of the OffSec organization. I think people have interpreted the try harder mentality that's like, no, you can't ask a question. I didn't have Google when I was coming up in the ethical hacking space. I didn't have all the resources you have. I didn't have David's videos. I didn't have Udemy or Cyberry or INE or anything like that. So if I didn't have all of that and I figured it out, you have to figure it out too. And so we get back to this, you have to be this high. Your bar has to be this high if you want to be in this space. And I think that has created an unnecessary amount of toxicity. It's turned people away from our industry, which is a huge problem in and of itself. And it has created the egos that say that, like, oh, you don't have a CVE to your name, therefore you don't have a business being in this conversation. You don't have 100,000 followers on Twitter, you don't have a business being in this conversation. You haven't been hacking your entire life, you don't have a business being in this conversation. I think those egos have created a level of toxicity that I think a lot of people who have that mentality are afraid of being usurped by the vast amount of information. I'm envious of every person watching this video right now, wherever you are in your career. If you're beginning in this career field and you're watching David's videos, I would kill to be in your position because you have access to so much more information than I ever did when I was starting this. When I wrote my first password brute forcer, I did it in BASIC, and I was trying to figure out how to do it because there wasn't an easy book on how to write BASIC. I was 16 years old. I wasn't going to go find a book in the library. There was no Google, to be like, how do I hack? How do I write a password brute forcer to get into a bulletin board system? Right. When I learned about, this was when passwords were being stored in Etsy Password versus Etsy Shadow. I discovered that because I was working for a mechanical engineering company that had HPUX systems on a bus network, and I was just putzing around on the file system, and I saw something that said PASSWD, and I said, oh, cool, what's that? And I catted that and saw usernames and passwords on there, right? That was how we did it. That's not how you all who are consuming this content are going to learn how to be some of the best hackers this world has ever seen, because you have access to so much more information. And I'd kill to be coming up in this space, in the ethical hacking space, because of that. And I think you make a lot of people nervous in our industry because of that.
Yeah, I think it use it to your advantage. I mean, I think it's that whole thing. You can build further because you're building on what others have done. And so would you encourage young people or people breaking into the industry just to ignore that kind of nonsense and just focus on their goals? Yeah.
100%. I think if you stay away from, you don't let your ego, right? Mark Wahlberg, right? Good saying in Mile 22, in the movie Mile 22, he says ego is not your amigo, right? Ego is not your friend. Just stay away from it. Stay away from the toxicity. I mean, if you want to be part of those communities, that's fine. But you see somebody popping off on Twitter, don't engage in that. Be better than that. Like, trust me. I had somebody on the stream last night chatting. The question they asked me was, how to make $500,000 a year in cybersecurity? And my answer to them was be a CISO, right? You want to make $500,000 a year, be a CISO. You know how many CISOs have ever spent a day being a penetration tester in their life? Like zero.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good point.
I mean, if you want to be big, bad, bold, and beautiful, you want to make a lot of money in this space. You want to grow past the ethical hacking space. Like, all that toxicity that you surround yourself by, it's not worth your time. Put your time and effort into doing something more productive in the industry.
So now here's the question for you. I know you like 3. So if you've got 3 or 5, what are the 3 top skills that you should get, or 5 top skills that you would get? I've seen a lot of people talk about this. Like, they'll talk about, you need to know Bash. And you've mentioned some of this already. But like, what would you, forget about certs for the moment, what would you suggest someone focus in on initially?
I'm going to pull away from the technical side and answer my number 1 on this.
Yep.
Something that people don't necessarily think about, and it's the soft skills.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We have a problem in this industry where people don't know how to write a report. They don't know how to think like executives. They don't know how to talk to their peer group, let alone executives. And I think that as we come out of the hoodies, and as we come out of the shadows, and as we come out of being like the basement dwellers of the industry, you need to embrace the fact that you may be in a polo or sometimes a suit, sitting in front of a CISO or potentially the board members, talking about cybersecurity as an industry. And so I think we have failed at developing those soft skills as an industry. And as we become more and more mainstream, as we see the industry continue to grow, soft skills are going to be ridiculously important.
And that'll get you more money, yeah?
Absolutely. People aren't, and I say this cynically, you will always find edge cases, just like we talk about streamers or things like that. You'll always find edge cases of people making millions of dollars on HackerOne and Bugcrowd and things like that. If you got in on the ground floor, and if you were crazy smart, and if you had nothing but time to sit there and grind bugs out all day, every day, sure, you could probably be that person. But the people who are consistently, predictably, day in and day out, making more money, progressing their career further, are the people who can get on camera and articulate to you the ideas and the value of things that are being brought to the table. Being able to sit in front of a CISO and explain the risk of the SolarWinds attack to an entire organization. Be able to understand why you shouldn't have manufacturing systems that are running Windows NT, or maybe it is okay for you to have manufacturing systems that run Windows NT, and understanding how you look at an organization and apply a risk management approach to that Windows NT machine, instead of just throwing up your hands and saying, we should never be using Windows NT, and complaining about it, because those soft skills are what's killing us in our industry. Yeah. I had a CISO, he's the CISO at Unilever right now over in the UK. He had a really great statement that he put forth about it. He says, in IT and cybersecurity, we've been the voice of no for well over 20 years. And we have to stop that. And instead, we have to ask ourselves, how do we enable the business to take risk? And that's where soft skills come into play. You want to make a ton of money? Figure out how to be the smartest technical guy in the room and explain how to enable the business to take risk. And you will literally be invaluable in this industry.
I think that's great advice. So number 1, soft skills, yeah? So like be able to present. We can make a real joke of this, but like not live in a basement, but like, be presentable and all those kind of skills. And what about technical skills?
So on the technical skills, I think the technical skills are hard because technology is always changing.
Yeah.
And so I think instead of talking about a particular technical skills, I think when you talk about honing your technical skills, I think staying hungry is important. Always have that desire to learn. You talk about Go and Rust. We had some folks who were coming on the stream last night, and they'd asked about, like, has anybody ever done any hacking in Go and Rust? When I was coming up, no, Go and Rust weren't even languages that we would even consider. To this day, I probably couldn't open up Go as a programming language and understand what Go looks like from a coding perspective. If I were to program something in Go, I would have to go and be hungry and go learn that language and figure out how to program that language and be able to write some of the things that I've written in Python or Bash or C++ and write them in Go. And so you've got to have that hungry that says there's something new out there that I want to make use of that I've got to go learn. Whether we talk about automation, whether we talk about new programming languages, whether we talk about new exploit opportunities, whether we talk about whatever is happening there in the industry, I think staying hungry, and on the technical side, it's that hunger that's going to drive you to find I want to know more about this subject, and therefore I'm going to become an expert. I'm going to figure out how to break that system. I'm going to figure out how to defend that system. I'm going to figure out how to look for bad guys in that system.
I'm going to push you, though. So you've mentioned... Okay, so let me ask you this, because I'm going to put you on the spot now. Which operating system should I use if I want to learn? I like to be very pragmatic and very specific. I mean, you've mentioned Python. God. Which operating system?
Were you on my stream last night?
No.
Literally copies of questions I had on my stream last night.
Sorry, no, it wasn't.
No. I joke about that because it's like yeah, it's such a popular question, and I love it, and this is why I love answering it. I have a MacBook that I hack on. Mac has Linux on it. It has a Kali VM on it that I also use to hack on it. It also has a Windows VM on it because applications like Cain Enable only run on Windows, and Cain Enable to this day is the only application that does remote desktop protocol man-in-the-middle attacks, right? So you have to be flexible. I have a Windows machine that has Windows 10 on it, that has Burp Suite, Maltego, tons of Python libraries and things like that on it that you can use for web application security. You can use for programming. You can use for that stuff, as well, bug bounty programs and things like that. But on this Windows 10 desktop, I also have Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is how you run Ubuntu on Windows without a virtual machine. And you can do Kali in WSL. You can do Ubuntu in WSL. You can do almost any Linux distro you want in WSL. And so I think we're really starting to see, we talk about lines being blurry, it doesn't matter. Look at your requirements. Like, do you need a laptop where you have to go to a client site every other week to do penetration testing? Okay, use your Mac, buy a Linux dedicated laptop, whatever it is you want to. If you're super into writing your own kernel, if you're super into doing your own IP tables, if you're super into all the customizations that you can do, absolutely go buy a System 76 and a Linux dedicated laptop and do it that way. If you like MacBook because you can have a Linux-based operating system, but you still have the flexibility of some Office-based controls because you still have to write reports. If you're doing ethical hacking, you will have to write a report. Don't think that you're ever going to be an ethical hacker without having to write a single report in your entire life, because it's going to happen. So you're going to need Microsoft Office to write that report. So maybe Mac is the right answer. Maybe you're doing bug bounties at home. Maybe you have to do a lot of corporate stuff, and you're still doing hack the boxes and trainings. And so you use a Windows machine with a Kali VM or Windows subsystem for Linux on a Windows machine to do it. I don't think it matters. What do I use? If I use whatever meets my requirements.
I'm really glad you said that, because the problem, I think, is people try and put other people into a box, or in technology into a box. And I think the older you get and the more experienced you get, you realize lines are blurred. And it's, don't get hung up on this shiny object. There's a lot of options. And I think what you've really said well is soft skills will go further in life than technical skills. If you can present, if you can write, in some ways that can take you much further, especially if you go into management, than just pure technical skills. But a combination of both is a fantastic skill set to have.
I'm hoping for the day that we have more technical CISOs sitting at the larger levels of organizations, because I think that's where we have to be in cybersecurity. But yeah, you're right. I think people people are used to boxes, and we talked earlier about certifications versus degrees, and I think we talked offline about the the usefulness of a degree. And I think the institutions of degrees and colleges and things like that have created the construct of a box that's like, if you want to be successful, it needs to be in this box. And I think the difference that we're seeing in cybersecurity is there isn't a box that says you have to be in this box to be successful.
Yeah, so basically, to sum that up, you're saying there are many, many paths. It's just stay hungry, keep learning every day, and it's going to make a big difference in your career.
Absolutely, 100%.
Neal, we're out of time again, man. This goes way too quick. So I really want to thank you for joining me again. Really appreciate it.
Always. Thank you for having me, David.